Steven Seagal's hand locked around the teacher's wrist like a steel trap, twisting until the man's knees buckled and his face slammed against the hallway wall. The predator, who had spent months believing he was untouchable, was now staring into the cold, unblinking eyes of a father who had killed men 1,000 times on screen and looked ready to do it once for real. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades. Steven Seagal's hand closed around a man's throat and pinned him against the brick wall of a school hallway before the guy even finished his sentence. The teacher's feet left the ground by 2 inches, his clipboard clattering to the floor, his face turning the color of raw steak. What happened in the next 48 hours would become one of those stories that people in the martial arts world still argue about at seminars and after parties, a story whispered about for decades, the kind of thing that sounds made up until you talk to someone who was actually there. Now let me set this up for you because the details matter. It's 1988. Steven Seagal is not yet the mega movie star. He's on the edge of it. Above the Law, his first film, just wrapped production and hadn't hit theaters yet. But in the martial arts community, the man was already a walking myth. 7th Dan black belt in Aikido, first foreigner to ever operate a dojo in Japan. He trained with some of the most dangerous people on the planet, and the Whisper Network among martial artists had one consistent message: do not test this man. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Seagal at that time had a daughter enrolled in a private school just outside Los Angeles. She was young, middle school age. And Seagal, for all his tough guy reputation, was fiercely protective of his kids in a way that went beyond normal. He'd show up to school events, he'd know the teachers by name, he paid attention. Believe me, the man paid attention. So when his daughter came home one afternoon and wouldn't make eye contact with him, Seagal noticed immediately. He was standing in the kitchen of his house, pouring a glass of water, and she walked past him without a word. Didn't say hi, didn't drop her backpack on the counter the way she always did. She just moved through the room with her arms folded tight against her body and went straight upstairs. Seagal set the glass down. He didn't call after her. He didn't yell. He just stood there for a second, and then he walked to the bottom of the stairs and listened. He heard her bedroom door close. Not a slam. A careful, quiet close. That was worse. He went up, knocked twice. She told him to go away. He opened the door anyway. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, still in her school uniform, staring at the carpet. Seagal crouched down in front of her so he was below her eye level. He didn't ask what happened. He said, "Tell me who." She looked up at him. Her eyes were red but dry. She hadn't been crying. She'd been holding it in, which for a kid that age takes a kind of effort that breaks your heart. And then she told him. There was a teacher at her school, a man in his early 40s, history class. He'd been saying things to her, comments about her appearance, comments about her body, standing too close, finding reasons to keep her after class, and then that day he'd put his hand on her lower back while she was sitting at her desk and let it slide down while he leaned over her shoulder, pretending to check her work. She froze, couldn't move, couldn't speak. When the bell rang, she practically ran out of the room. Seagal's jaw tightened. His hands, resting on his knees, went still. Not clenched into fists, just still, completely still. Get this. The man who had spent his entire adult life training to respond to physical threats with explosive precision did not explode. He stayed crouched in front of his daughter. He asked her the teacher's name. She told him. He asked if this had happened before. She nodded. He asked how many times. She held up 4 fingers, 4 times. This man had put his hands on Seagal's daughter 4 times. Seagal stood up. He kissed the top of her head. He told her she did the right thing by telling him. He told her she didn't do anything wrong. He told her he was going to handle it. Then he walked out of her room and closed the door behind him just as carefully as she had. He went downstairs. He picked up the phone and called the school's main office. It was after hours. Nobody picked up. He hung up, grabbed his car keys, and drove straight to the school. Now here's where the story splits depending on who's telling it, but the core facts line up across every version I've heard. Seagal arrived at the school around 5 in the afternoon. The building was mostly empty. A few staff members, a janitor. The after-school programs had wrapped up. But Seagal knew something that most parents wouldn't know. He knew the history teacher coached the junior varsity debate team, and that practice ran until 5:30 on Tuesdays. It was a Tuesday. Seagal walked through the front entrance. He didn't check in at the office. He didn't sign the visitor log. He knew the layout of the school because he'd been there for parent nights and conferences. He moved through the halls with purpose, his boots barely making a sound on the tile, and he found the classroom. The door was open. The teacher was inside, alone. The debate kids had already left. He was sitting at his desk, organizing papers, and he looked up when Seagal filled the doorway. I say filled because you have to understand what Steven Seagal looked like in 1988. 6'4", 240 pounds, hands the size of dinner plates, dressed in black, which he almost always was. He didn't look like a parent. He looked like a problem. The teacher recognized him. Everybody in that school knew who Steven Seagal was, and for a split second, no kidding, the teacher actually started to smile like he was about to say something friendly. "Hey, Mr. Seagal, what brings you by?" He never got the words out. Seagal crossed the room in 4 strides, took the man by the front of his shirt with one hand, and lifted him out of his chair. The chair spun away and hit the wall. Seagal walked the teacher backward until his spine connected with the chalkboard. A tray of chalk clattered off the ledge and scattered across the floor. "You touched my daughter." Seagal said it flat, no volume, no rage in the voice. But his grip on the teacher's shirt twisted tighter, and the fabric started to creak. The teacher's hands came up, palms out, the universal gesture of, "I don't want trouble. Mr. Seagal, I don't know what she told you, but there's been a misunderstanding." Seagal's free hand came up and pressed flat against the chalkboard right next to the teacher's head. Dust puffed out from the impact. "Say that again." The teacher swallowed. "She's a sensitive kid. Sometimes students misinterpret things. I'm a tactile teacher. I use physical encouragement, a pat on the back, a hand on the shoulder. Her back isn't her shoulder." I swear this happened. The teacher actually tried to negotiate. He started talking faster, saying he'd been teaching for 15 years, that he had a spotless record, that parents sometimes overreact, that kids exaggerate. He got about 2 sentences in before Seagal pulled him off the chalkboard and walked him across the room again, this time toward the door. Now you might think Seagal was about to beat this man unconscious. Every instinct in a father's body would support that. A 7th Dan Aikido master could have dislocated every joint in this man's arm with a casual wrist rotation. He could have dropped him with a throw that would have put the teacher in a hospital bed for weeks. The techniques Seagal had spent decades mastering were designed to neutralize threats with devastating efficiency. But here's what actually happened. And this is the part that separates this story from every bar fight tale you've ever heard. Seagal pushed the teacher out into the hallway. The man stumbled, caught himself against the opposite wall, and turned around with his hand still raised. His tie was pulled sideways. His glasses were crooked on his face. He was breathing hard and sweating through his dress shirt. Seagal stepped into the hallway after him. "You're going to listen to me once, and I'm only going to say this once. You will never be in a room alone with a student again. You will never touch another child. And you will resign from this school by the end of the week." The teacher tried to straighten his tie. His fingers were shaking. "You can't just come in here and threaten me. I'll call the police. This is assault." Seagal took 1 step forward. Just one. The teacher flinched so hard his head hit the wall behind him. "Call them." "Trust me on this." Those 2 words did more damage than any wristlock could have. Because what Seagal was really saying was, "Go ahead. Call the police. Let's have that conversation. Let's talk about why a 40-year-old teacher is putting his hands on a 12-year-old girl. Let's see whose story holds up." The teacher went white, not pale, white. The blood left his face so fast he looked like a man who'd just been told his plane was going down. Seagal didn't move from that spot. He stood in the hallway, blocking the path toward the exit, and he waited. He waited for the teacher to understand exactly where he stood, not physically, existentially. Now here's where the story gets complicated. And honestly, this is where it gets real. Seagal didn't just leave. He went to the principal's office. It was locked. He went to the administrative wing and found the vice principal, a woman named Diane, who was still there finishing paperwork. He walked into her office, sat down across from her desk, and told her everything his daughter had told him. Diane's face went through about 6 expressions in 10 seconds. Shock, doubt, concern, fear, and then something that Seagal later described as recognition, like she'd been waiting for this, like she already knew. "Has anyone else reported this man?" Seagal asked. Diane hesitated, and that hesitation told Seagal everything he needed to know. "How many?" he said. She shook her head. "I can't discuss other students with you, Mr. Seagal. There are privacy policies." "How many?" She closed her eyes. 3 complaints in the last 2 years, all handled internally. Seagal's hand was resting on her desk. His fingers pressed into the wood hard enough that his knuckles turned pale. 3 complaints. 2 years, handled internally. That meant buried. That meant talked about in meetings and filed in drawers, and followed up with conversations that started with, "Let's not blow this out of proportion. Mark my words, this is where most people lose their patience entirely. This is where a regular father starts screaming. This is where someone with Seagal's physical capability might put a fist through drywall." He didn't. He leaned forward and spoke in a voice so quiet that Diane later said she had to lean in to hear him. "You're going to fire him, not suspend, not investigate, not transfer, fire. And if he's not gone by Friday, I'm going to make sure every parent at this school knows about those 3 complaints, and I'm going to let them decide what happens next." Diane opened her mouth to respond. Seagal stood up. He didn't wait for her answer. He walked out of the office, back down the hallway, past the empty classrooms and out the front door. The teacher was in the parking lot. He was leaning against his car, fumbling with his keys. When he saw Seagal coming through the front entrance, he dropped his keys on the asphalt, bent down to pick them up. His hands were still shaking. Seagal walked directly toward him. The teacher scrambled to get his car door open. He managed to get inside and lock the door just as Seagal reached the driver's side window. Seagal stood there. He didn't pound on the glass. He didn't yell. He just stood there and looked down through the window at this man who had spent years using his position to prey on children. The teacher started his car. Seagal stepped back. The car reversed out of the parking spot in a jerky, panicked motion and pulled away, tires chirping on the asphalt. Seagal watched the car leave. Then he got in his own car and drove home. Now you're thinking, that's it? Steven Seagal confronted a creep and threatened to expose him. Where's the explosive action? Where's the Aikido? Hold on. We're not done. Not even close. The next day, Seagal made 3 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer. The second was to a private investigator he'd used before. The third was to the parent of another student at the school, a woman he'd met at a fundraiser the previous year, whose daughter was in the same grade as his. The private investigator went to work immediately. Within 24 hours, he had names. Not just the 3 complaints Diane mentioned. 7 students over a 4-year period had either formally complained, informally mentioned inappropriate behavior to guidance counselors, or told their parents something that got brushed off as a kid being dramatic. 7 kids. No lie, when that number came back, Seagal went quiet in a way that people around him said was genuinely frightening. Not angry quiet, empty quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a decision that can't be undone. His daughter had been number 8. Seagal drove back to the school the next morning. This time he didn't go alone. He brought the private investigator's preliminary report, the lawyer, and 4 other parents who'd been contacted overnight and had agreed to come forward. They walked into the principal's office at 9 a.m. before first period started. The principal, a man named Arthur Hayes, was sitting behind his desk with a coffee mug that said "World's Best Educator." I want you to picture that mug, because it's going to matter later. Seagal walked in first. The parents filed in behind him. The lawyer stood by the door. Hayes looked up, confused, then concerned, then scared. He knew. The moment he saw the faces, he knew what this was about. "We can discuss this calmly," Hayes started. Seagal put the report on his desk. 8 pages. Student initials, dates, descriptions, a pattern so clear you could have drawn it with a ruler. Hayes looked at the report. He didn't pick it up. He looked at it the way you'd look at a snake on your kitchen floor. "That teacher is in his classroom right now," Seagal said. "Room 214, teaching children. Right now." Hayes reached for his phone. "I'll call a meeting with the school board. We'll form a committee to review the allegations." One of the mothers behind Seagal stepped forward. Her name was Patricia. Her daughter had been one of the first 3 complainants 2 years earlier. The complaint that had been handled internally. My daughter stopped sleeping through the night, Patricia said. She was 11 years old and she started locking her bedroom door. And you formed a committee. Hayes put the phone down. Seagal picked up the world's best educator mug, looked at it for a second, and set it down on top of the report, covering the first page. You've got 1 hour. They left the office. The lawyer stayed behind to explain in precise legal terms what would happen if the school failed to act: civil liability, criminal referral, media exposure. The lawyer was thorough. He was also expensive. Seagal was paying every cent. 45 minutes later, the teacher was called to the principal's office over the intercom. Every student in the building heard his name. He walked down the hallway, and students later said he looked like a man walking to his own execution. He went into the office and the door closed. Now here's the part that nobody saw, but that came out later through administrative records and depositions. Inside that office, the teacher was confronted with the report. He denied everything. He used the same language he'd used with Seagal: misunderstanding, sensitive students, tactile teaching methods. Hayes, who 24 hours earlier had been prepared to form another committee, had apparently found a spine overnight, possibly because a lawyer had explained in detail how many zeros a lawsuit would carry. He told the teacher he was suspended effective immediately, that his classroom access was revoked, and that the matter was being referred to the school board for termination proceedings and to law enforcement for investigation. The teacher stood up. He knocked his chair backward. He said, "You can't do this based on the word of some kids and a celebrity father with a vendetta." Hayes apparently said nothing. He just slid the report across the desk. 8 pages, 7 students, 4 years. The teacher read the first page, then the second. By the 3rd page, his hands were shaking again. By the 5th page, he sat back down. By the 8th page, he was done. He didn't resign that day, but he was escorted from the building by noon, carrying a cardboard box of personal items, with the janitor holding the front door open for him. Students watched from classroom windows. Teachers watched from doorways. Nobody said a word. Here's the thing, though. The story doesn't end with a man carrying a box. 2 days later, the local police department opened a formal investigation. 3 of the families filed complaints. The private investigator's report was entered as supporting documentation. The teacher hired a defense attorney. A legal process began that would grind on for months. And Seagal? What was he doing during all of this? He was at home, with his daughter. This is the part that I think matters more than any confrontation, more than any hallway showdown, more than any dramatic moment in a principal's office. The night after the teacher was removed from the school, Seagal sat with his daughter on the back porch of their house. It was dark. The Los Angeles sky had that orange-gray glow it gets at night. She was sitting in a patio chair with her knees pulled up to her chest, and he was sitting next to her, not saying anything. After a while, she asked him a question that stopped him cold. She said, "Dad, did you hurt him?" Seagal looked at her, and this mountain of a man, this martial arts legend who could have destroyed that teacher with his bare hands in under 3 seconds, shook his head. No, why not? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because hurting him would have made me feel better, not you." Let that land. Just let it sit there. A man who had built his entire public identity around physical dominance, around being the toughest guy in the room, around never backing down, chose restraint. Not because he was weak, not because he was afraid of consequences, because he understood that the situation wasn't about him, it was about his daughter. And what she needed wasn't a father who put a man in the hospital. She needed a father who made sure the man could never do it again. For real, that's the hardest thing a powerful person can do. Use their power strategically instead of emotionally. Now I need to tell you what happened to the teacher, because justice isn't justice unless it arrives. The investigation took 4 months. During that time, 2 more former students came forward. The total reached 9. The teacher's defense attorney tried to get the case dismissed on procedural grounds. The judge denied the motion. A preliminary hearing was scheduled. The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable. The teacher pleaded guilty to 4 counts of inappropriate conduct with minors and 1 count of sexual battery. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and required to register as a sex offender for life. His teaching license was permanently revoked. The school district settled civil suits with 5 families for an undisclosed amount. Principal Hayes resigned at the end of that academic year. The school implemented new policies requiring 2 adults to be present during any after-hours student interaction. A reporting hotline was established. All of that started because a 12-year-old girl told her father the truth, and her father did something about it. But here's one more piece of this story that almost nobody knows, and this is the part that turns it from a story about a celebrity dad into something bigger. 6 months after the sentencing, Seagal received a letter at his home. It was from Patricia, the mother who'd stepped forward in the principal's office that day. Her daughter, the one who'd stopped sleeping through the night, the one who'd started locking her bedroom door at age 11, had started sleeping with the door open again. She'd joined a swim team. She was laughing at dinner. Patricia wrote one line at the bottom of the letter that Seagal reportedly kept in his desk for years. It said, "You didn't just protect your daughter, you protected mine." Now think about that. Think about the ripple effect of one man refusing to let a system protect itself instead of protecting children. Think about what would have happened if Seagal had just gone through channels, filed a complaint, waited for a committee, trusted the institution. His daughter might have been complaint number 4 in a drawer, another name on a list that nobody acted on. Instead, he showed up, physically, personally. He put himself in that hallway. He put his hand on that chalkboard. He sat in that vice principal's office. He made phone calls. He hired people. He organized parents. He spent money. He applied pressure. And he did all of it without throwing a single punch. And honestly, that might be the most impressive thing Steven Seagal has ever done. More impressive than any movie fight scene. More impressive than any dojo demonstration. More impressive than any story about him training with masters in Japan. Because the question at the center of this whole story is one that every parent hopes they'll never have to answer. What do you do when the threat to your child isn't physical? What do you do when the enemy is a system, a bureaucracy, a pattern of institutional cowardice? What does a 7th Dan Aikido black belt do when the fight isn't about bodies but about power, about access, about silence? He redirects the force. That's literally what Aikido is. You take the energy coming at you and you redirect it. The teacher's power came from the institution protecting him. Seagal redirected that energy by making the institution's protection more expensive than its accountability. The administration's inertia was the attack. Seagal used their own weight against them by introducing liability, exposure, and public pressure. He fought this the way he was trained to fight. He just did it without a single wrist lock. If this story hit you the way it hit me the first time I heard it, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now. We tell stories here that don't just entertain you, they remind you what real strength looks like. If you're new, welcome. If you've been here, you already know. Now let me finish this. Years later, after Seagal had become a full-blown movie star, after Under Siege and all the rest, a reporter asked him about the incident. This was at a press junket, so the question caught him off guard. He wasn't expecting it. The reporter had done her homework and found the court records. She asked him, "Is it true you personally confronted a teacher who was accused of molesting students at your daughter's school?" Seagal paused. The other journalists in the room leaned in. Cameras kept rolling. "I did what any father would do," he said. The reporter pressed. "But you have martial arts training. Were you tempted to use it?" Seagal looked at her for a long moment. His expression didn't change. His body didn't shift. He was completely still in that way that only someone with decades of physical discipline can be. Then he said 7 words that, in my opinion, define the man more than any film, any belt, any title ever could. The hardest fight is the one inside. He didn't elaborate. He moved on to the next question about whatever movie he was promoting. But that line hung in the room. It hung in the air the way a bell hangs after it's been struck. Everyone heard it. Nobody asked a follow-up. There was nothing left to ask. Because that's the truth of this story. Steven Seagal is a man who could have destroyed that teacher, physically, permanently, without breaking a sweat. He had the skill, the size, the fury, and honestly, most people would have understood if he had. A jury of parents might have acquitted him on the spot. But he didn't. He chose the harder path. He chose the path that actually fixed the problem instead of just punishing one man. He chose the path that put a predator in prison instead of just in a hospital. He chose the path that changed a school's policies, emboldened other parents, validated other victims, and sent a message to every administrator who ever buried a complaint: someone is going to show up. And when they do, your committee won't save you. And at the center of all of it was a girl. A 12-year-old girl who was brave enough to tell her father the truth while sitting on the edge of her bed staring at the carpet, with her arms folded tight against her body. She trusted him, and he made sure that trust was worth something. That's the legend, not the hallway confrontation, not the chalkboard dust, not the parking lot standoff. The legend is a father who took the worst moment of his daughter's young life and turned it into the reason 9 families got justice. The legend is restraint weaponized, discipline applied where it mattered most, power used not to destroy, but to protect. And if you ask anyone who was there, anyone who was in that school that week, anyone who watched that teacher walk out with a cardboard box while students stared from windows, they'll tell you the same thing. They'll say they've never seen anything more dangerous than a calm man with a plan. That's Steven Seagal. That's the story. That's the legend. And it's still being told.